Hey everyone, welcome to Cloud-Based Connect. My name is Oscar Medina and I'm here to talk to you about Jenkins X, the open source platform for Kubernetes native CI/CD. And I've been with Cloud-Based for over a year. There's a lot of changes happening in the platform, but I think the introduction I'll give you today will cover foundational features that remain no matter what version you're using. So I'm looking forward to showing you what those are and answering any questions along the way. So let's go ahead and get started. This is purely a beginner's guide, by the way, so you don't have to know anything about Jenkins X. I do hope that you probably heard of Kubernetes and maybe a few other related technologies we use, such as Helm and Scaffold, Chart Museum and whatnot. But if not, it's okay. If you ask a question, I'm sure we can answer that for you. So let's go ahead and explore Jenkins X, and we'll try to do it in a fun way as much as possible. Again, ask questions along the way. I'm happy to answer those. The first thing I would like to cover and I think there's a lot of confusion, rightfully so, because the name Jenkins X implies that Jenkins is part of this. And the truth is that Jenkins was part of it in the beginning. Now this project is more than a year old now, but the reality is Jenkins is not part of this as of April 20th, which was not too long ago, by the way. We deprecated static masters in Jenkins X. And what do you get from that? Well, I'll show you the architecture that we have moving forward because it's nothing like Jenkins at all. So Jenkins X is a completely new code base. You wouldn't expect any remnants of the code in Jenkins to actually come through in the new repository for Jenkins X. Nothing from Jenkins has been ported over into Jenkins X in terms of features or code. This is all from scratch. And the whole difference, I think, in my mind, is that Kubernetes native CI/CD is what we're trying to target right now versus Jenkins, where at the time that was written, there was no such thing as Kubernetes, right? So we're trying to address different things, different architecture, and we're trying to address different problems that exist in cloud native world. To me, when I think about Jenkins and Jenkins X, it's merely just the spiritual sort of counterpart of Jenkins X, and the pipeline concept, meaning, you know, the execution of a pipeline, is the only concept I really see that they have as a common feature. Everything else is very different. So Jenkins X in general is an opinionated Kubernetes native CI/CD platform, which is comprised of a whole bunch of open source frameworks and technologies. Enumerating some, we have Chart Museum, Scaffold, Helm, and several others that you don't actually need to know. And I think this is one of the value propositions of Jenkins X is you don't need to know Kubernetes and related technologies to use it. You could set it up easily as per our documentation and then get started as a developer. Follow your typical developer workflow, which is, you know, you have an application, you do a feature branch and proceed with making changes, do a pull request, and all of that is essentially what you'll still be doing if you use Jenkins X. The difference is, however, that when you use Jenkins X, now you have a bot that will actually track some of these changes via the PRs, and you'll have the ability to have um, different opportunities to approve or reject changes as they go along. And we'll talk a little more about those details shortly. So one of the things that you should know is that the project is over a year old. However, we're targeting 3 major clouds: AWS, GCP, and Azure, right? At the moment, as of today, if you use GKE, you have the greater chance of success. We're working on AWS to refine it, make it better. But the reality is that there are some things we need to work on. And of course, we always welcome contributions because this is, in fact, an open source project, right? We're working on Azure AKS support, which is also a collaboration with our partners at Microsoft. Now, one of the biggest differences that I can tell you about Jenkins X and Jenkins is that Jenkins does not have Tecton, doesn't know about Tecton. And Jenkins X only knows Tecton. Tecton is a Google-sponsored open source project that is becoming the de facto pipeline engine for many tasks that you carry out in Kubernetes. So there was a point in time, probably around Jenkins 2.0, Jenkins X 2.0, that the core team decided to incorporate Tecton as the underlying pipeline execution engine. And so as of today, in this recording, you will not see static masters doing the Groovy base pipeline definition and all that, right? Tecton is what we're using, and that's the only thing you will see. Pipelines in Jenkins X are actually quite nice, and the reason is that they're more readable. The YAML-based pipeline definition is more clear. I know a lot of people dislike YAML. I personally like it because it's just readable. Indentation issues always happen, but that versus Groovy or JSON-like definition, yeah, I prefer YAML. One of the greatest benefits, and if you are a CTO of a startup, if you are a manager of a team that you're leading in the ops team in your environment, perhaps you should look at the fact that Jenkins X actually has ephemeral pipelines running in Kubernetes. And that means that you are not running static master 24/7 to accomplish your application builds, right? As soon as Jenkins X is done running your pipeline build based on a PR in this case, the resources in Kubernetes are destroyed, which means you don't have to pay extra for running pipelines and keeping resources up that shouldn't be up. So that's one of the greater benefits I see. And this is why it's Kubernetes native, right? It means when you install Jenkins X, it is installing in the background CRDs, config maps, secrets, volume definitions, and services, deployments, all of those things that we are used to in Kubernetes. Nothing else it fits in. It's all native objects. So this is why I like to say that Jenkins X is a first-class citizen in GKE. And actually, as of today, and actually not too long ago, it is a first-class citizen in EKS as well. So I encourage you, many companies have a multi-cloud strategy, you can actually use it for both clouds and know that it is reliable on both. Now, one of the things that you should know is that because we use Tekton, and Tekton is a tremendously great project from Google. I think most projects coming out from Google, to be honest with you, are. The thing about our adoption of Tekton is that we internally decided to abstract you as a user of Jenkins X of the intricacies of defining a pipeline run, or a task, which are, the object types in Tekton. And we decided to abstract you from that. So what you're seeing here today at the very top is somewhat of a mapping between the Jenkins X pipelines, which is the release pipeline, the pull request pipeline, and the feature pipeline, which you can modify and overwrite steps and do whatever you need to do, all within your YAML file definition. Now, all of those get translated into various objects and types and in Tekton, right? But you don't need to worry about that. We abstract you enough from it that you focus more on just overwriting a certain step. Perhaps you have a shell script that you want to run before a certain stage or a certain task. And so what you do is you have the freedom to do that, right, just by defining it in YAML, right? And our pipelines are extensible for many reasons, right? You can override stages that are built in. And the reason I say built in is because we have the concept of build packs. And the build packs combined with the pipelines give you sort of this amazing recipe that you can then leverage to target a specific language that your app may be using. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in further slides, but just know that whenever you import an application into Jenkins X, we most likely support the technology, the language that you are using on a day-to-day basis, right? One of the greatest features, I think, I mean, I've used it quite a bit, is the Jenkins X preview environments. I think I've talked to many companies that, because of this particular feature, decide to go with Jenkins X as their CI/CD Kubernetes native platform. And that is because, as a developer, you're not working on your own, isolated, and like you are part of a team ultimately that the team needs to see your progress. The team needs to see if you made a pull request and you made a feature change. It is just obvious that either product managers or project managers, maybe designers, if you modify the UI of this app, will want to see a preview of what that looks like before it goes into, say, a staging environment or a production environment, right? And so that's what you get with preview environments in Jenkins X. Now, one of the things I've done is kind of at a high level outline the type of Kubernetes objects that you get when we talk about preview environments, right? So we have, the non-technical description of it, which I just gave you. But also, if you're curious to know what actually gets created as resources in Jenkins X, that's at the bottom of this slide, right? And I'll also show you another way that you can view on a fresh Jenkins X Kubernetes cluster what resources are created. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, another great feature of Jenkins X is Chatops. And this is a way for the Jenkins X bot to, let's say you're doing a pull request in your application. It's going to immediately give you feedback. And some of those things are like, this pull request is not approved automatically. It's got to go through some checks and balances, which means, maybe your lead developer or architect is commenting via GitHub, please change this, check this line out, or whatever. All of that happens in the context of, in this case, GitHub, which I use quite often when I demo Jenkins X. You don't go outside, as a developer, you don't go outside of your normal day-to-day tools to interact with Jenkins X, and I think that's quite valuable, right? You're not changing your workflow just because you're adopting a new technology. So, and we have the concept of quick starts. Quick starts, I think the best way to describe it is if you want to install Jenkins X and in a few minutes take a look at what it does, a quick start will basically allow you to kick the tires without having to write any code. Meaning, I don't have to import existing applications. We have quick starts, which are like application templates for a given language, whether it's Python, Ruby, Node.js, and several .NET Core, I believe. There's a whole bunch of them. You don't need to write any code to kick the tires of the platform and see an end-to-end scenario where you import an app or create an app and then modify it via a pull request or feature branch and then see it promote from staging to production. You don't need to write any code to do all that, right? Now, some of the people I've talked to don't necessarily have powerful machines or machines to work with. It's really more of a preference as a developer. I prefer to work on my MacBook Pro, fully loaded, whatever. Others may not have that luxury. And so you have the ability with Jenkins X to say, well, I'm going to develop with a DevPod, which is really just a Kubernetes pod that does several things, right? Syncs your GitHub project, attaches it, mounts it locally. You're able to make changes to the project. There is a live reload sort of thing that allows you to view changes, builds the images, the versions, all in real time. And in the end, what you get to see is actually progress before you even check in your code. That's what DevPods do for you. And again, if you're wondering what that looks like in terms of Kubernetes objects, they're really just like an ingress for this DevPod with actually a separate namespace, and it all just works seamlessly right from your laptop or desktop, right? Now we talked about quick starts, and quick starts use build packs to give you the opportunity to try out a project type given a language. But it is the build pack that actually defines all of the underlying intricacies of what the pipeline, built-in pipeline, will do, right? Because you're not writing any code. And what do I mean by that? So I'll give you an example. If I create a quick start that uses I think we call it node-http quick start, named exactly that, what you will get is you will get a scaffold of a project that has all of these different files, including the default Helm chart, which is created automatically for you. You don't have to know Helm, but if you do, you can modify it. And it creates the pipeline file, which is a YAML file. It creates a scaffold file and several others. Now, at that point, you've not written any code whatsoever. And I actually have a sample application where I have some tests written in Mocha.js for my Node.js application. And I run it through Jenkins X. I didn't have to define a pipeline or say, hey, run this test, this Mocha test, and this bash command or whatever. I didn't have to do that. And the reason for that is that our build pack for Node.js automatically runs npm test, and a few other standard commands for that given platform or language, right? So that's what I'm referring to when I say build packs, or have that underlying intricacies that you need to run a particular project type, like in this case, Node.js, right? Let's see. Now, another feature that I'm really excited about that Jenkins X supports is actually serverless deployments using Knative. When we talk about saving money and not running resources 24/7, there's another way of doing that too, and that's at the application level. You're not running that application pods and whatnot. They're not running 24/7. Enabling Knative deployments in Jenkins X allows you to spin basically based on the bandwidth need, either scale up or down. And that's the beauty of serverless deployments in Jenkins X. Now, another thing we have, and you might have seen, I do have a workshop on this, is Canary Deployments using Istio and Flagger, which are to me, in my mind, the de facto tools to add to allow for this kind of functionality, right? And one of the greatest things that you can do is, in one of the workshops, I walk people through enabling that for a given application, and then targeting a new feature as a developer to only 20% of the requests that hit your application, say, in your production environment, right? And all of this is already built in. You don't have to do a lot, but follow a few commands to enable Canary deployments for your specific application. So now I've talked a lot about other concepts that we practice in the whole Jenkins X project, but one of those that stands out quite a bit is GitOps. And the reason for that is that in a few slides, earlier I showed you that Jenkins X is an opinionated Kubernetes-based platform. And part of that opinionated is that it's going to guard you against making mistakes and not following what I think about as best practices, right? So Kubernetes alone, if you use it, you can do a lot of things and easily mess things up, right? And it's complex. What we're doing here is abstracting you from that complexity, putting some guardrails in place, and then allowing you to just focus on your workflow to develop applications and application features and deploy those and test them out, right? You don't have to worry about any of the other stuff involving the infra or infrastructure. Part of the greatest, I think, concepts that Jenkins X abides by or practices is GitOps, because if you don't know what GitOps is essentially everything happens in source control, whether that's a configuration change for Jenkins X itself, or perhaps a change in your application as you do as a developer, a pull request in GitHub and whatnot. In the background, Jenkins X is changing the version of your Helm chart, which you probably don't even know is happening. And that's all done automatically for you. Of course, like I said, do not confuse this kind of opinionated model with the fact that you cannot make changes to the platform. That's not the case. You can. It's fairly extensible. It's a lot of the configuration you can make in a declarative manner using YAML. And so that is how you can make changes, version those changes, and roll back if you need to. So hopefully you have questions. I think I covered some of the major features of Jenkins X. There's always additional questions I've gotten in the past, so I hope to answer your questions here in the chat. I'm available for you to just throw any question that you feel you want to ask, and I'm happy to answer. So thanks again, and I appreciate you joining my talk today. Thank you.